Okay, great. So does anyone have questions on chapter 6 before we start going through some of the problems? This chapter is very, the content in this chapter is very relevant to my work. So this is something I deal with every day, is cost allocations and the methodology and the drivers and the pools. And I don't know if anyone else has come across this in their line of work. Anybody had to deal with anything like this? No? Okay. All right. You know, so I think maybe just before I jump into the problem, like I'll just kind of refresh a little bit on the concepts here, because I think it's just really important to understand. The reason that we do this is really about our ability to identify whether certain departments, revenue generating departments, actually are profitable or not. And since many revenue generating departments have you know, a very clear set of direct costs, we know exactly how to cost them out. There are obviously the people that work in the department, the specific costs associated with that work, and then the revenue that's generated. So that's really easy. You can say, oh, this department brings in a lot of cash or a lot of revenue. But what's harder sometimes is then to take a fixed cost pool that maybe a hospital has or your agency and try to see, how do I allocate that fixed cost pool back to all the revenue generating departments so that I really do understand how profitable they are. You could have a department that's actually not profitable once you allocate all the cost departments to them. So it's a little bit of a puzzle that you have to solve. And so this chapter is really about giving you the tools and the logic around how to allocate the costs that are not direct. And so that's the idea, right? So I was thinking we could start with problems that are very similar to the ones that were in your homework assignment. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and go into Excel file here. Share, okay, and we'll go to my Excel file. Okay, can everyone see my Excel file here? Yeah? Yes. Great. All right, well, so the first problem in the book is it's just sort of setting up the idea of the cost pools, what we call the cost pools, and the cost. Cost pools and cost and our department. So let me start with. I'm going to just put a 3. So we have one department, and in this scenario, it is housekeeping department. Okay, so that's kind of what we're starting with, and that housekeeping department is a cost center. So it's not a profit center, right? It doesn't generate any revenue. It's purely cost. And this example is, I'm just a number of $300,000 is the cost. Okay, we have 3 different revenue generating departments, okay, that are over here. Sorry about my phone. And those 3 departments are revenue generating departments, or sometimes we call them profit centers. Okay? It's another term that we use for revenue generating departments. Okay, and so what we want to do is we want to figure out how to allocate the housekeeping department costs to these 3 profit centers. And before we actually get into the very specifics of the departments themselves, we have a couple different methodologies that we can use to allocate these costs. One methodology is we could use the patient services revenue. Each of these departments has patient services revenue. And then the sum of all 3, the total, is, I'm just going to use an example here of $10 million. So we haven't clearly identified yet what each department has, but we do know that it's in total $10 million. Similarly, we could use housekeeping service hours. That's another methodology that we could use. And in this case, the total service hours of the housekeeping department are 10,000 hours. Again, you could use either one of these are options to allocate the $300,000 costs across the 3 departments. So what one thing that we could do is we could say there's a total of 10,000. We know that we want to create a relationship between our $300,000 and our $10 million revenue. So if we create a relationship between the two, we could simply just divide. We could divide the 10 million over the 300,000, right? And that would just give us a number, right? Of 33.3. And that would be something that we could use. We could allocate it evenly, essentially, right? If we didn't have any other way to do it, we could use this driver, and we could then just allocate it directly. So we could say, all right, for every 300,000, we're going to allocate, right? And I think I went the other way, actually. So I'm going to go the opposite way. Sorry, I'm just going to divide by this. And then, what you're doing essentially then is you're allocating the spread of the total, the $10 million and the $300,000 have a relationship. You're using that relationship to allocate all the pieces, right? So that's one way to do it. And I'm gonna do that one more time. So you have 33. You're multiplying your rate for all of them, right? And you're allocating it across all the parts. And you could just divide by 3. You could say, this is how much it is for all of them. And then whatever the specific revenue is for each of these. So for instance, let's say that it's completely even. You've got $10 million. You're dividing it by 3. So there's your revenue, for each of these, right? So we'll go, so that could be one answer. If they were all completely even, and you were then to take your metric, which is this 33.3, multiply that times your revenue, okay? And actually, right, it's the 300, times the revenue. It's the revenue divided by the 33. There we go. Okay, there it is. So what we did is we said we're taking the revenue in the department, and then we're dividing that by the metric, okay? That's giving us 1/3, essentially, right? So I'm taking the revenue, dividing it by the metric, it's giving us 1/3. That adds up then to the $300,000, okay? Right there. So that's one way to do it, and it's obviously it's even, right? A better way, we'll go on to the next problem, but so that same logic can hold true for labor hours. So if you were just to come up with a very general rate on labor hours, then you could use that to allocate, okay? But what's really important here is to be able to look at the difference between the 3 departments and try to then come up with a percentage. So we're going to do that in the second problem here, okay? So we have, in this example, we have 3 departments, okay? 3 revenue generating departments here, okay? And each one of these has its own revenue, okay? And its own labor hours, all right? So when we add them up, you can see they add up to $10 million, okay? And then the labor hours add up to 10,000 hours. So what we're going to do then is we're going to create an allocation. So what we're calling it essentially. So we're saying the percentage of the one department out of the whole. There's a percentage there, right? So in this case, the first one is 50% of the total. It's revenue, which is 5 million, represents 50% of the, okay? Let's see. We'll just wait on that one. All right. The second department is 2 million over the total revenue. So that would be then 20%, right? The third department is 3 million over total 10 million revenue. That would be 30%. Okay. So if you add up all these percentages, that gives you 100%. Okay. So that is a way that you could allocate. So you could use this allocation curve, if you want to call it that, or spread, that you can use that and you can allocate your, whatever your cost is. I think we had said it was $600,000 in our example. And we could say, okay, now we're going to use this allocation methodology or allocation spread. This is your allocation. And then we have the cost pool, right? So we have a cost pool, and we know that cost pool, in this case, is $600,000, okay? So we're going to take the percentage, okay, the percentage of each department, multiply that percentage times the cost pool to give us how to allocate those costs across these departments. This is one way to do it, okay? So this is just saying if you use revenue, okay, and you multiply the revenue, you will come up with this kind of spread, right? Department number 1 gets 50%, department number 2 gets 20%, department number 3 gets 30%. There's your total, okay? The other way, of course, that we can do it is labor hours. So here's the labor hours here. Okay, there's the patient services and labor. I'm just going to bring those over here a little bit closer so we can see, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a very similar thing, is we're going to figure out what is our spread or our percentages of labor hours over total. So I'm going to do that, come up with our percentage. You know, it's another way of doing it, okay? And then we are going to see what the percentages are. Here we go. Okay, and that should be a sum. Yes. Okay. So now you can see that these percentages are different, right? So again, we're gonna put our cost pool here. Here's our cost pool, $600,000. And we're gonna do exactly the same thing. We're gonna take the total cost pool and multiply it times the percentage of labor hours in each department. Okay. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to take a look at that and see how it's different, right? Okay, so then there should be a total. That total should also be 600,000. Okay, so these are two different methodologies that you can use to allocate costs. So, you know, when you look at this, you can see that, you know, for each of these departments, here's a department that has 50% of the total revenue. Okay, for these 3 departments, this department represents 50% of that total revenue, whereas it only represents 35% of the labor hours. Okay, again, the labor hours represent how much labor is expended in each department. So how much labor is used to clean each department, all right? So for whatever reason, this department is $5 million worth of revenue, but it requires less labor hours to clean it than this department over here, number 3, which is a $3 million revenue department, but it requires 6,000 hours of labor to clean, which is 60%. So can you guys think of reasons why you would have a department that actually might have more, it might actually generate more revenue, but actually require less hours to clean than another one?
A place that would have more people and it would be a smaller place.
Mm-hmm. Or it might make a lot of revenue per person.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a psychiatry office maybe or something, might generate a lot of revenue, but it doesn't have that much space. Whereas you might have another place that has a lot of, like, I don't know, clinic, a lot of space, and not so much revenue, right? So what's really important in this example is to see that you're allocating those costs correctly, right? So which would you think, if you were to look at this and say, okay, so you've got, the spread on revenue shows up as this spread here, which is very correlated to the revenue, versus the spread here, which is based on labor hours. Which do you think is more accurate if you're trying to spread the cost of the housekeeping department across these 3 departments? Which one would seem more accurate?
Probably the first one.
Well, tell me why you think so.
I keep going back and forth. So.
Think of it this way. So let's say that you had to, let's say that you decided to split up these departments and start your own clinic and psychiatry office and whatever, right? And you had to go and come up with an idea of how much it would cost to clean the office after you split up, okay? You could no longer use the same housekeeping department. You had to go out and get your own services, okay? Which methodology would you use if you wanted to figure out how much it would cost to get your own services?
I'd use the second one.
The second one, right? So essentially then the second one is more accurate. It more accurately represents the real cost of cleaning your department, right?
And the full dollar amount.
Exactly. The allocation of revenue is just simply a way to allocate it, but it may not reflect the reality of what it really costs to clean. It's just a very high level allocation methodology, right? So you're able to get something like this, like hours. It's always going to be better to use those if you can get it. Sometimes though it takes a lot of effort to actually get those, to get that level of detail. Like not every housekeeping department is going to track how many hours it takes to clean a certain area of a hospital, let's say, right? But if you were able to have that, then that would allow you to have a very accurate cost, right, allocation. Mm-hmm. So do you guys kind of get that? You've got several different ways you could allocate costs here. And you can see, because this is kind of a stark example of the 2 different ways, how very different they are and how one is really general and one is very accurate, right?
So if you have to cut cost and that is transferred to having one less person, so then even though the department that actually generates more revenue would have to lose a person, let's say, so that the example number 3 or item or clinic or department number 3 would, even though it would still generate less, but it would have the necessary people to clean that department, even though. So I guess I'm having a little difficulty understanding, like if you have to cut cost, then how do you make the decision of removing someone from department 1 so that it covers department 3, even though you're going to be making less money? And so in the end, you would have less people cleaning.
No, that's it's a really good question, and I really appreciate you asking it. So let's do a little bit. Let's look at that. Okay. So here I'm going to just say is we've got a housekeeping department that is costing us $600,000. Okay. So let's make some assumptions on that. Let's just kind of figure this out. That's a good question. So let's say that each cleaner, okay, we'll say we have a certain number of cleaners, and let's say we have a manager, okay, in our department, okay, and then we have supplies, right? So those are the kinds of things that we would have in the department, right? So let's say that each cleaner, they have a full-time job. Let's say that they earn, I don't know, what do you want to say? Maybe $50,000 a year. That might be a little generous, but let's just say that's what they earn, okay? And let's assume that that includes fringe benefits of not 500,000, 50,000. And let's say our manager earns 75,000. Okay, just to kind of put some round numbers in here, right? Just so we can. I keep wanting to pay them a lot more, don't I? Here we go. Okay, and so let's say then we have a certain number of people. Let's just say we've got 10 people, 10, right? It may not quite work. Let's see if it works. We got 10 people at $50,000 each. That's $500,000. Our manager is 75. That leaves us with $25,000 worth of supplies that we have to buy. Okay, there's our $600,000. Right? You guys see that?
Oh,
Okay. So we've got 10 people. Again, these are just kind of obvious numbers, but just to give you an example of how you would think about that, right? So here you are, 10 people, one manager, and $25,000 worth of supplies. There's your cost pool, okay? And now let's go down here and say we know what our revenue is for each department because we have that up here, right? We don't know what our direct costs are. But we know that we have direct costs, right? Each department is going to have their direct costs, which are the actual people that work in the department, right? We know that, right? So for this example, why don't we just use an assumption on that of like 50%? I know that may or may not be accurate, but let's just use it for now. So we'll just say that our direct costs for each department end up being about 50% of the revenue, okay? So that's the salaries of all the people and all the depreciation, machinery, and what have you. Okay. So then we have our net direct costs. Okay. So we're going to look at each department and say, well, we've got revenue minus costs, right? So what do we have left? Well, we have our net margin. Net. Okay. Now we're going to put our allocated costs in here, which is what we just did. We just allocated the housekeeping costs, right? So we're going to put that here, and we're going to let's use the labor hours, okay? Because we think that's more accurate, right? Here we go. We got our labor hours, so we can add up now our little mini P&L here. We've got our revenue, we've got our direct costs, our net, $5 million, and then we've got $600,000 in costs. Now let's say that that's all the allocated costs we have. Only that, okay? So we're going to take our net and we're going to subtract out our allocated cost to get our final number down here, which is our margins, right? Okay? So that's our net margin, right? Or our net profit, I should say, net profit. Let's calculate our margin. All right? Our margin is our net profit divided by our total profit, okay? So each of these has a margin, okay? Right? Total is 44%, and every one of these is a little different, right? So we see that this one, number 3, is only making 38%. This one's only making 48.5, almost 50, and this one's making almost 48.5. So on average, it's 44. Now, I don't know if it was April or Alexander. I'm not sure which one of you asked the question. Let's say that your CFO said that these need to get down. These costs or these margins need to. Well, let's say this margin needs to get up. Okay, let's do that. Let's say that we want that margin of that department to be the same as the other two. Okay, and so the only place that you feel like you can cut is your cleaning, because you got a big bunch of cleaning there, right? So first, let's figure out how much cleaning would you need to cut in order to get to the right margin. Let's do that first. So if we needed to have a 48.5% margin, then we could take that margin and multiply that times the revenue, and that would tell us how much total cost we would need, right? So we would need, excuse me, profit, I apologize. This would be the profit target that we're looking for, right? All right, so we know we're making a profit of 1.4, right? And we're looking for, 1.14. We're looking for profit of 1.455, a difference of $315,000. So we would have to cut a pretty big number, really, right, out of our housekeeping. We'd have to cut. We have 360,000. We're going to cut 315 out. That would leave us with $45,000, right? So that's remaining housekeeping, right? Right, cost, right? And this is what would have to cut. Cuts in housekeeping. Okay. So now, how do you translate those cuts to people, right? And what would you, if you only had 45,000 left, what would you get? How much cleaning would you get? And is that doable? Right?
So would you remove like 7 people or decide to take away the manager? Can you take away the manager and just do, because that's the highest cost. Because otherwise
that's absolutely one way to do it. That's definitely one way to do it. Or, you can, you could possibly ask them if they could clean faster with less people, or maybe change the types of cleaning. Instead of cleaning every day, maybe they clean once a week. I don't know, right? Like, you think you would have to look at all those options and say, but in order to cut that much out of it, you would have to cut
more than 7 people.
People, right? So this may not be like the most realistic scenario, but that kind of gives you an idea of what you would have to think about if you're going to change your margin. Another thing to think about as well, that maybe the cost we have right here of 50%, maybe that's something you could also work on. Maybe you could reduce your cost, right? So that's not 50%, it's like 45%. Or maybe you can increase your revenue, as a percentage, right? And that's kind of the same thing, really. It ends up being mathematically the same thing. But those are things you could look at, right? If you wanted to bring your margin up. You could kind of look at every line and sort of say, what could I either do to increase it or decrease it so that my margin improves? In this case, as I said, it would be hard to cut that much. But again, if you were just to cut one person out of here, you would have less cost, of course, and less cost would be allocated. Then the question, of course, would be, is that the decrease in labor hours, meaning decrease in service quality, is that appropriate for what you need? And can you live without that? So it's all very related to the business, right? And decisions that you would make around your business. So that's why it's really important to make sure that your direct and your indirect costs are allocated as appropriately as possible. Right?
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So let's now go to the next set of problems. Okay, now these problems are about, we have 4 different, what we call revenue generating departments, 4 of them here. And we have 3 support departments, okay? And the 3 support departments, from what I see here, we've got one that's called General Administrative. I'm just going to call it G&A. Okay, we've got one that's called, I'm going to call this one, Financial Services. And then the last one is called Facilities. Okay, so those are our 3 departments, right? And these are the costs of each of those departments. A really big hospital, right? These are very large numbers, okay? What we've already been given here is what the drivers are for each of these. So somebody's already gone through and said, hey, here's what I think you should use to allocate your revenue. To allocate your cost. So for G&A, please use patient services revenue. That's the right allocation methodology, right? For For financial services, same thing, use patient services revenue. And then for facilities, the right allocation methodology is square footage, okay? So then if we look over here, we've got a few different things here, okay? We've got the 4 departments. We've got our patient services revenue for each of the departments. We've got our square footage for each of the departments. We've got our labor hours, so we've got a couple others in here. We've got labor hours for housekeeping. I think this is housekeeping labor hours, I think. Let me just make sure
Yes.
what that is. Yeah, housekeeping labor hours. I'll just call it HS. Okay. Housekeeping, HK. And then we have salary. Okay. So those are all very normal types of allocation methodologies, depending on what it is you're allocating. Okay. So what I always like to do next is maybe just create a little sort of another matrix right below it. This is the actual the drivers, if you will, and then this is the percentages. Okay. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and say, let's go ahead and create our allocations. And we're just going to take the totals over take the department total over the grand total. And what I'm going to do here, and I think I showed this to you before, is I'm going to lock the cell that I don't want to change. So I don't want to change, well, actually what I'm going to do is you can see where I have a $K and a $4. Can everyone see that? So the $K means I'm locking the K, which is the column. I'm locking it to column K. The $4 means I'm locking it to the 4th row, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lock it on K, and I'm not going to lock it on 4, and I'll show you why, okay? So what happens then is if I pull this down, it's basically pulling the formula, and it's keeping it tied to this column, okay? And it's not allowing it to move, but it's allowing the rows to change. And therefore, if I do that, then everything, I can just pull my formula down. You can see that, okay? So now I have my allocation formula for each of these different types of allocations, okay? So now I'm ready to do my next step, which is like actually calculate how all of these could be allocated, right? So first we're going to start with our G&A, okay, our G&A. So I'm going to just put that here. This is our pool of dollars, okay? And again, so we're going to take this pool of dollars. Whoops, I didn't put the pool in yet, did I? Let me go ahead and move this over one more, just so I have room for the pool. Here's the pool. So the pool of dollars. Anyone want to tell me what the pool of dollars is for G&A? So let me ask another way. What's the total cost of the support department called G&A that I need to allocate to all my other profit centers?
4 million.
That's right, 4 million. It's up here, right?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to allocate. So I'm going to use that first, and I'm going to say 4 million times my percentage of each department. And I got to change that so we don't want it more. Okay. And here in this example, I'm going to lock my cell E17. I'm going to go ahead and lock it on column E because I don't want that to change. So I should be able to just pull it over, right? Like that. And then I should be able to see that my total is going to equal $4 million. In this example, I was able to use the patient services revenue as my allocation, okay? And I was able to then see how much I needed to allocate to each of my, my different profit centers for that particular one, okay? So now I'm going to do the second one, all right? And that next one is my financial services, right? Okay. And that one is $2 million, okay? So now I'm going to do the same thing. Now this is square footage. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong let me do this differently. I'm going to do patient services revenue again. That's what we're saying we need, right? We need patient services revenue. If we go back up here, we've already been told that it's patient services revenue that we need to use to allocate the financial services department. Okay, that's this one. So I'm going to go ahead and reuse it. I'm going to go ahead and use the same. So I'm going to take my $2 million cost pool, and I'm going to multiply that times, again, the patient services percentage of total. Okay, and I'm going to change this list. And then I'm going to lock my column so that I don't pull that across. And then I'm going to just go ahead and do that. Right? I'm going to pull it across, and let's see, did I come up with 2 million? Yep, there it is. So there's my financial services allocation. Okay. And last but not least, we have facilities. That's the last one, right? Facilities. Anybody want to tell me what the cost pool is for facilities?
7 million.
7 million.
Yep. Okay. So there it is, 7 million. And what do I need to use for facilities department? What allocation methodology am I using?
Square feet.
Square feet.
Square feet. Okay. And so what am I multiplying the 7 million times? Can you guys tell me that?
40.
40%, right? Right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's good.
Oh.
So I'm going to go ahead and multiply it times 40%. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lock my cell. All right. And then I'll just be able to pull it on over here. Right. And I'm going to make sure that I got everything in accounting form. Okay, there you go. So there you go. Those are my 3. These are all using the methodologies that we've said. Okay. Here we go. So that's how we've allocated it. Now that follows the original driver methodology. So if we stop there and say, okay, that's perfect, we're done, then we would stop, okay? But I think that the book's asking us to look at a couple other things, right? To see if it's possible that there might be other ways to do this, right? So let's go back to the questions. Let's see here. So if the hospital uses salary dollars as the cost driver for general and administrative, okay, so now that what they're saying, let's try this a little differently. Let's go ahead and I'm going to just bring it down here, okay, so we can kind of do it again, right? In this example, we want to use we want to use salaries, and then we want to use housekeeping hours. So we want to use them different. So we're going to use what they said was we're going to try it with salary for these 2, I believe, right? Oops, I'm in the wrong, I apologize. I'm in the wrong, I wanted to do that down here. Okay, I'm going to leave that one the same so we can compare against it. So we've got salary for these 2, right? G&A and finance. And then facilities is now going to be labor hours for housekeeping, right? Now our pools haven't changed, right? They're the same, right? Our pools are the same. We're just looking at new ways to allocate the costs, right? Okay. So now let's go ahead and we've got our pool times, now we have our salary, our salaries are here, right? We already did that. So we know that it's 21%. And we can do the same thing on this as we can pull those across, right? Just pull them across. One more decimal point. Okay. And then the financial services as well. Let's take the total cost pool times the salary. Okay. And pull that across. Oops, we need to lock our column. Okay. Otherwise it becomes a mess. All right, there we go. All right, and last but not least, the one that they're asking us to look at for the facilities now is housekeeping hours, which is this, okay? And that, again, we'll lock our cell, and we'll bring it over, and here we go. Okay, so now we've got a bit different, right? So one thing we could do, if we wanted to compare these 2, right? We got a scenario, sort of a scenario 1 and a scenario 2, right? I'm just going to call this scenario 1 in scenario 2, okay? And then what's kind of easy to do in Excel is just to say, well, let's just subtract one from the other, okay? So this is, let's subtract the one that we normally use, subtract it from this new one. Let's see, what's the difference, okay? Let's just kind of see what that is. So here we go. All right. So that's interesting, isn't it? Now, first of all, you notice that the variances are 0, right? Anybody know why the total variances would be 0?
Because you're still comparing the same revenue.
Yep, that's right. So it's really that you're just looking at different spreads now. It's still all 100%, right? So it's really just, you have an opportunity then to say, well, does it make more sense in this case if we were to use salary? Would it make more sense to allocate our G&A expenses over salary than over revenue? Because we would have a lot less, right? So another thing we could do actually to kind of test this out or think about it is to do a little P&L again, right? Because we have revenue, don't we? We have patient services revenue for each of the departments. Now we know what our labor costs are, don't we? We have our salary costs here. They're the 3 million or 300,000. It's not very much salary, is it? Very little, right? But again, my example, you know what I could do is I could add 3 zeros to each of these just to kind of make it a little bigger. How about that? Just so we've got apples and okay.
Unless it's in thousands.
That's true. So let's just assume it was in the thousands. Okay, I like that. So it doesn't change the percentages because I just added 1,000 to each of them, right? I've made them. So now we've got our revenue, right? Got our salary cost. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and add benefits in just for the heck of it. So then we're going to add our facilities, right? Oh no, sorry, G&A costs, right? Let me do a net. Total direct, and then I'll do G&A. That's one of the costs we have. We have financial services, and then we have facilities, right? Okay. And then we've got total expenses, and then we've got net income, and we've got margin, right? Okay, so those are all the. So I'm just going to assume for the purposes of this that we have a 35% benefit rate, okay? Just for the heck of it, all right? Well, our direct margin would be taking revenue, right, minus, actually, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm just going to do direct costs. Let's not do direct margin yet, okay? G&A in this example would be here, right? That's the first one, right? And then we're going to take financial services, and we're going to take facilities, okay? And then we're going to sum our total expenses, which are basically all of these things, right? Okay? So our net income would then be the 20 million in revenue minus the expense, okay? And the margin would be the net income over the revenue. So that gives us what our margin is in this case. Okay? It's 30% margin. Now, I think we should be able to use this and just pull it across. Let's see. Well, no, it doesn't completely work, does it? Let's find out why. Oh, actually, it does. It does work. So, no, I see. I see what I did wrong. Hold on. Let's do this. So what I did is I have a subtotal here. Can you see that? My total is called total direct. So I'm going to, I could do two things. I could just subtract the subtotal, or I could change my sum formula so that I'm starting with the subtotal. Okay, so let me do that. That might be better. So I'm just going to start with my subtotal here like that. Okay, so that changes, and I'll pull that across. Right. Okay. So then what that shows is, in some of these situations, we have very little revenue, right? And our salary costs, like in this situation, our salaries and benefits cost more than our revenue that we're generating. That's not a good business model, is it? a lot of money. We're losing 192%. Okay, so that one, even though we're allocating a smaller number of costs to some of these, it's still, that business model doesn't work. And you can see this one is the most profitable, right? We get 50% revenue. Then we've got 6% on the second business model and 4% now. Now what I'm just going to quickly show you is this is our P&L given the first scenario 1, right?
Wow.
Now, we redid this because we wanted to see if our new allocation methodology might actually be more accurate, right? So here's our scenario 2 P&L, and we're going to do that now, right? And we know that our revenue is not changing. That's still going to be 20 million, and so forth and so on. So we'll pull that across, right? Okay, our salaries are also not changing, and we can go ahead and do the same with those. That's here, okay? And the benefits we'll calculate, because I pulled the formula down. And then we've got our G&A. So we're going to go with our second method, our second scenario now of the 3. So here we go. Here is the patient revenue, the facilities revenue, whoops, facilities revenue, I'm sorry, financial services, I apologize. Financial services, that's here, right? Here. Just want to make sure that I think I might have pulled the variance, didn't I? Yes, I did. Let me do that again. So I'm actually pulling scenario 2, which is up here, right? There we go. 428, and then facilities up here. Okay, and then there's the total expense. So let me pull that across as well. Okay. Now, under this new scenario, we have different margins, right? So what happened here? Give me your thoughts on the differences between these two methodologies in terms of allocations. What do you notice?
The expenses are less for some, or, well, they're less for all, just to, well, except for problem 3. Never mind.
For the first one, which is this one, number 1, right? Department 1, it's actually better, right? So the expenses are less, right? So it's shifting those allocations here, the 3 allocations. It's shifting them out of this first one, right? And it's shifting them into these other 2 or these other 3, right? Is what it's doing. So if I were to add up the 3 allocations in the scenario 1 with number 1 department, you can see that it adds up to almost $6 million, right? But if you add them up in the second scenario, it's only 2.6 million. So there's a big difference here between these 2, right? And so that's why the margin's better. The margin gets better because you have less expenses here, right?
Wow.
Interesting, because that happens a lot. When you allocate charges just based on revenue, then the departments that have more revenue absorb more cost. But it may not be a way to do it, right? It may not necessarily mean that they should, right? And so that's why it's really important to kind of think about it a little bit more. Then if you look at this one, this goes from 6% to 5%. So there's definitely a little bit more cost being shifted here, right? Again, if you look at the 3, it's almost 2.7 million versus the 3 here, or it's 2.8. Okay. So, there's a little bit of a change, right? It's, again, 2.7 to 2.8. It's a little bit higher. Not a whole lot, but a little.
But the biggest change is for
sorry, does somebody have a question?
no, just saying that the biggest change is for department number 3.
Yeah, because that went from costs of 1.3 million here in the allocated costs to almost 5 million. That was huge, right? Huge. And then this last one, I don't know if it did better or worse. Let's see. So here we are, 3.1 million, and in this example, it is 2.7. So it actually did a little better, right? We were able to shift some cost out of this one. but still it's a really bad business model, isn't it? Okay, so that's kind of an idea of how these allocations work, right? Just in terms of the how you think about them, how you use them, how you can make business decisions on them. Any questions on this, or I can do a few more examples, but I just want to kind of pause and see if that makes sense, if it all makes sense to you.
I have a question about the cost pool. Is a cost pool equal to total cost that can be direct plus indirect, or is always overhead indirect cost?
So there's different kinds of cost pools. Okay, so it's a really good question because you actually have some cost pools that are direct. So that's interesting, right? So not all direct costs are sitting in the department. So here's an example of one is psychiatry. So you might have, several departments in a hospital that require psychiatry. Again, I don't know how your agency works, but that you might share psychiatry services. So that instead of having a psychiatrist in every area of the hospital, you decide to have one psychiatry department, and that psychiatry department then will come and provide you services, right? But those are direct services. Those are supporting your clients, right? So they're not overhead costs. They're direct, but there's still a cost pool. So you could have some cost pools that are a direct cost pool that we just need, again, to figure out what's the methodology for allocating those costs to your profit centers. And in that case, it's probably going to be based on client hours, right? So that would be one way to do it. Then you also have indirect cost pools, which are like the ones we were looking at, right? These are indirect. They're, overhead cost pools, right? So it just kind of depends. You can kind of have any combination, really, right? Does that answer your question, April?
Yes, but okay. So I think I'm looking at problem 6.3,
Okay.
and then it indicated the direct cost. So I've been thinking, well, do I want to include those direct costs or not?
Do you want to include direct cost?
Yes, because I'm looking at it, and for example, the GA is 2 million, the direct cost. Mm-hmm. So I assume that indirect cost is 1.5 million. So do I use the cost pool? Do I use 2 million plus 1.5, which is 3.5 million, or do I use 1.5 million only overhead? Because when I look at A, I'm thinking, well, do I want to include direct and indirect? But when I look at B, it did specify you only want the overhead cost, so which is 1.5. But I'm not sure about A. Do I want to include direct cost?
Yeah, I'm on problem 6.3. Maybe you need to point to where you're looking because I'm not seeing specifically what you're asking. Where do you see that?
Oh, okay. So page 226.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the direct cost, right? The GA, the general administration, is 2 million.
That's not direct.
So
that's not necessarily direct cost, right?
Oh, okay. So 2 million is not a direct cost.
Oh, okay. You know what? I'm sorry. I do see that now. Those are the direct costs of each. Okay. So what it means is, I know it says that. So what it means is these overhead departments have own direct costs, right? But those aren't necessarily direct costs for the profit centers.
Okay. Got
Those
it.
are indirect costs for the profit centers. So it just depends on how you're using that term. So sorry, that's a little confusing, I know, but every department has direct costs, right? It means it's the direct cost for that department. But when you want to take all your indirect departments and allocate them to your profit centers, they may become indirect costs then, right?
Thank you. Then that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Any other questions about this? Was this somewhat clear? Okay, well, send me an email if you guys have any specific questions. I'm happy to try to answer any specific you have, but hopefully this gives you enough information to actually attempt these problems.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. I think we're out of time, unless anyone else has any other comments or questions. We've got 3 minutes left, so I'm happy to take any last minute questions. I think this stuff's really fun.
Not there yet.
Hopefully you will be, right? Hopefully.
Sorry, did you mention earlier on at the beginning of office hours about the individual assignment? That was
The one there's a group assignment due this week.
mm-hmm. But the one previous last week, the one we just turned in last Sunday?
I didn't speak about it, no, but did you have a specific question about it?
Yeah, just curious how the grading process was like so far.
Okay, yeah, and I haven't had a chance to start that yet.
Okay.
I'll be looking at that this week, so I'll definitely let you know as soon as I grade them. I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay, thank you. It was a lot harder.
Was it? Yeah.
I think at the beginning it was I think overall it was challenging.
Do people find it easier to work in groups versus individual?
I think it helps to work in groups.
Yeah.
Working groups. We've been doing everything, I feel.
Yeah.
Individual and groups. So
That's good. Yeah. But I think it is good to work in groups, actually. The only reason I didn't have you do it last week was simply because you had your midterm and I wanted to give you some time to be able to manage your calendar a little bit more, I do think groups are better. So
Makes sense.
So I feel sometimes I don't know if most of us, but some of us have been working individually and then we get together and try to go over them.
yeah.
So,
That's probably the best way to do it because then you can kind of bounce off each other. Like worry a little bit if you're just divvying out problems and and each person does one or two and you're not all doing all of them, then I think that's going to be a little dangerous, right? Just because you're not doing all the problems, you're not learning everything, right? So I think that would be the only thing I would say you should be careful of doing that. And I think, to the extent that you guys are finding different answers, you should absolutely have debates about that. You shouldn't just assume that somebody else knows how to do the problem, because I think that, that may not be true, right? So if you're finding differences, you should really, as a team, work through those and make sure, and even reach out. You reach out to me. I know some of you have done that, and you've reached out and asked about specific questions and problems and like you're stuck. And I think that's healthy and good. And I think you should absolutely do that.
thank you.
You're leveraging your team,
Yeah.
your groups. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, I hope everyone has a great night, and we will, again, email me if you have any specific questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.